Have you ever stumbled upon a secret so powerful it threatens to reshape your entire understanding of who you are? That's exactly what happened to Vanessa Thompson one fateful evening when she delivered a custom cake to an exclusive party for the reclusive millionaire, Jacob Henderson. Little did she know that, hidden among the glitter and grandeur, she'd come face to face with a past she never knew existed, a past tucked away in Henderson's wallet. The photo she discovered changed everything, igniting a spiral of drama, betrayal, and long-buried secrets. Brace yourself for an unforgettable story of fate, family, and the chilling hand of karma. Vanessa Thompson had never been one to believe in luck. She believed instead in hard work. For the past 6 years, she dedicated herself to building a career in food service, starting off cleaning dishes, and eventually rising to become one of the most trusted waitresses at the Riverside Grill, a trendy restaurant perched along the banks of the Columbia River in Washington state. At 26, Vanessa had bright, inquisitive eyes that never missed a single detail about her customers. She also had an uncanny ability to remain calm, no matter how chaotic the kitchen or dining room became. That evening was a particularly busy one. A phone call from a well-known event planning company had come through, requesting the Riverside Grill's best waitress to deliver and serve a custom cake at a private party. Word around the restaurant was that it was for none other than Jacob Henderson, the enigmatic millionaire who owned a tech startup that had skyrocketed in value. Virtually everyone in town had a story to tell about Jacob Henderson's rumored wealth, but few had ever laid eyes on the man himself. Vanessa's boss, Clara Hamilton, had approached her during the lunch rush. Clara had always trusted Vanessa, especially with high-profile clients. She placed a supportive hand on Vanessa's shoulder, eyebrows raised in excitement. "Vanessa," Clara said, "we got a request for you specifically. They want you to deliver the cake for a private function at Jacob Henderson's estate." Vanessa's eyes widened. "Jacob Henderson, are you sure that's what the event planner said?" "She mentioned you by name, said you'd personally served her friend last month, and she was really impressed." Vanessa was taken aback. She'd served countless customers, always trying to brighten their day with a smile or a kind word, but to be requested for such a high-stakes job felt surreal. The detail that truly intrigued her was how the request came from a third party, who apparently remembered her service. Well, sure, Vanessa replied, feeling both honored and a bit apprehensive. "When do they need me there?" "Tonight," Clara said. "You'll deliver the cake around 7. They've also arranged for you to stay until after dinner to serve dessert." Vanessa nodded, trying to mask her nervousness. She had heard rumors about Henderson's estate, how it was perched on a hill overlooking a vineyard, how the lavish property was guarded by tall iron gates, and how hush-hush any activities there were kept. If nothing else, it would be an adventure. She spent the remaining hours of her shift tending to the usual lunchtime rush runners, hurrying to their tables for a quick bite. Families with restless children and couples savoring a quiet meal. Her colleagues teased her playfully about getting to hobnob with the elite. "You might come back in a limo," one joked, "or you'll get discovered and never come back." Teased another. By the time the day began to wind down, Vanessa found herself behind the wheel of the restaurant's delivery van, carefully cradling a 3-tier chocolate and raspberry cream cake. It was a masterpiece of pastry art, each tier adorned with delicate sugar flowers. The sweet aroma of dark chocolate filled the van's interior, blending with the adrenaline surging through Vanessa's veins. As she drove to Henderson's estate, the sun sank behind the rolling hills, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink. Eventually, she spotted the tall iron gates, flanked on either side by uniformed security guards. This was a world completely foreign to her, one where money was no object and privacy was paramount. Yet she reminded herself she was here to do a job and do it well. Little did she know that beyond those gates lay not just a party, but a moment that would rewrite her entire understanding of her past. Long before Vanessa worked as a waitress, she had been a curious, energetic child with boundless hopes. She grew up in a modest two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Spokane. Her mother, Lisa Thompson, juggled 2 jobs to keep them afloat. Vanessa's father was never in the picture, having vanished before she was old enough to form a memory of him. In their cramped living room, a single photograph sat on the mantel, a slightly faded snapshot of Vanessa around 6 years old, laughing on a swing. Lisa appeared behind her, caught mid-push, beaming with love. Vanessa grew up hearing her mother's reassuring words. "We may not have much, but we have each other." Lisa often told her daughter bedtime stories about strong, independent women who conquered obstacles through grit and determination. Those stories shaped Vanessa's worldview and guided her through the tough times, like when an eviction notice threatened to uproot them, or when bullies at school mocked her thrift store clothes. She learned to endure, to remain hopeful, and to believe in the power of resilience. While other teenagers spent time gossiping or experimenting with the latest fashion trends, Vanessa took on part-time jobs after school. From babysitting to delivering newspapers, every penny she earned went to help her mother pay the bills. She grew up fast, perhaps too fast. She was no stranger to scrubbing floors or washing dishes. But despite these responsibilities, she never lost her bright outlook on life. She carried that spark of optimism with her into adulthood, where she poured her heart into her job connecting with customers by remembering tiny details, how they liked their coffee, whether they preferred a booth or a table by the window. Yet behind Vanessa's warm smile lay a persistent, gnawing question. Who was her father? Why had he left them without so much as a goodbye? Over the years, Lisa had dropped vague hints mentioning an old college flame, perhaps, or a man who had too many dreams and not enough commitment. But she never gave Vanessa a name. Whether it was to spare Vanessa the pain of knowing or to protect her from a complicated truth, Lisa remained tight-lipped. She promised Vanessa that if she ever found a substantial lead, she would share it. However, Lisa passed away when Vanessa was 17, succumbing to a sudden illness that left no chance for final revelations. Vanessa felt an immense, unspoken void. She tried rummaging through her mother's belongings, old diaries, letters, photos, but found no clear answers. It was as if her father was a ghost that had evaporated from the records, leaving only faint footprints in her mother's memories. As she grew older and the sting of her mother's death subsided, Vanessa resigned herself to living without that missing puzzle piece. She focused on surviving, forging a new path, and making sure she never repeated the cycle of hidden secrets in her own life. Yet the question about her father still lingered in the back of her mind. Was he even alive? Did he ever think of her? The memories of her mother's protective, loving nature still guided Vanessa. Even now, as she pulled up to the gates of Jacob Henderson's estate, she silently wondered what Lisa would think of her delivering a cake to a man so powerful and rich. She'd probably tell me to hold my head high. Vanessa thought, "It doesn't matter where you come from, only where you're going." Perhaps in Lisa's memory that was exactly what Vanessa did. She sat tall in the van, took a deep breath, and pressed the buzzer at the towering gates. If only she had known how deeply her childhood and her father's identity would be entwined with the events about to unfold. Once through the gates, Vanessa was guided by a uniformed guard down a winding driveway that passed a perfectly manicured lawn and eventually led to a sprawling mansion. Blindingly bright lights illuminated the driveway, and decorative lanterns added an otherworldly glow to the towering oak trees scattered around the property. The estate was reminiscent of old Hollywood glamour, where sleek architecture met timeless elegance. By the time she stepped out of the van, the moon was visible, hanging like a silver ornament in the sky. Two attendants approached swiftly, offering to help carry the cake. Vanessa politely declined, explaining that she'd been entrusted to assemble and present the cake exactly as the restaurant intended. The attendants nodded, leading her into a side entrance where the catering staff bustled about in crisp white uniforms. Inside, the air hummed with tension and anticipation. Wealth dripped from every corner of the mansion. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and ornate paintings, possibly originals from world-renowned artists, adorned the walls. Vanessa marveled at the lavish setting, but kept her composure. She was here to work, not to gawk. The party was set to begin in half an hour. As she carefully carried the cake into a large kitchen, she noted how calm and methodical the staff seemed. Chefs diced vegetables with surgical precision, sous-chefs stirred exotic sauces in copper pans, and waiters arranged silverware on trays, each piece placed with almost military exactness. Vanessa found a clear countertop to set down the cake, which had miraculously made it through the journey unharmed. With the help of an eager kitchen assistant, she began reassembling the tiers. The top tier had been separated for safer transport, and Vanessa fitted it back into place. She fussed with the sugar flowers, ensuring none of them were chipped or missing. Sometime during this delicate process, a tall woman with a blonde chignon approached wearing a tailored black suit and holding a leather-bound notebook. She introduced herself as Nicole Porter, the event coordinator. "Thank you for coming," Nicole said, glancing briefly at the restaurant's logo on Vanessa's uniform. "We're expecting about 40 guests tonight. After dinner, Mr. Henderson will request the cake's unveiling. You'll bring it in on a cart. Then you'll slice and serve each piece." Vanessa nodded. She was used to following instructions to the letter at upscale events. "Understood, Miss Porter." Nicole gave her a tight smile. "Just Nicole is fine. I trust that everything is up to your restaurant's usual high standards." "Yes," Vanessa replied politely. "The Riverside Grill prides itself on quality. The cake should be perfect." Nicole checked the time on her phone. "Good. I'll introduce you to Mr. Henderson before the main course. He'll want to make sure everything is in order." As Nicole turned to walk away, Vanessa couldn't help but notice the tension in her shoulders, as if the event planner were expecting something to go wrong. Her eyes flicked nervously around the kitchen. Before Vanessa could probe further, Nicole disappeared down a hallway. With the cake set up, Vanessa took a moment to steady her nerves. She could sense the hush of opulence around her, a hush that demanded perfection. She quickly touched up her makeup in the reflection of a steel fridge, making sure her hair was neat and her uniform spotless. She wanted to do a good job, not just for the restaurant's reputation, but for her own sense of pride. Eventually, the main doors to the dining hall opened, and staff began filing in with tray after tray of gourmet dishes, seared scallops on a bed of saffron risotto, miniature lobster rolls, caviar-topped canapes. Vanessa joined them to scout the environment. There in the center of the grand room was a large circular table where a group of elegantly dressed people had already gathered with champagne flutes in hand. Though the room buzzed with polite laughter and refined chatter, Vanessa felt a subtle undercurrent of tension, as though everyone was there with a specific agenda. She overheard tidbits of conversation about business deals in Singapore, family legacies, and rumors of who had borrowed money from whom. It was a far cry from her usual crowd. And somewhere in that crowd, she was told, was Jacob Henderson himself, the reclusive millionaire she'd heard so much about, yet never seen. Little did she realize how seeing him would set off a chain reaction that would unravel more secrets than she ever imagined. As Vanessa circled the room, discreetly checking which tables she'd need to serve dessert to, she caught sight of the host, Jacob Henderson, stood near the fireplace, flanked by a small group of men in tailored suits. He was a tall, lean man, perhaps in his mid-50s, with silver-threaded dark hair. There was an air of quiet authority about him, like someone used to, having every whim catered to curiosity flared in Vanessa. This was the man whose name was whispered in business circles and philanthropic events across the region. He was rumored to have risen from humble beginnings, though no one could confirm the details. Some said he'd grown up in a working-class neighborhood and studied relentlessly to claw his way to success. Others insisted he had come from wealth all along, and that his origin story was nothing but a marketing tactic to appear relatable, which was true. Vanessa had no clue, but the question danced in her mind. Subtle tensions seemed to weave through the room, invisible threads connecting certain guests. One older gentleman with sharp, watchful eyes kept glancing at Henderson, as though measuring him. A woman in a champagne-colored gown seemed intent on cornering Henderson's ear, but he gently rebuffed her with polite, small talk. Vanessa got the sense that alliances, rivalries, and hidden agendas mingled within these walls just below the surface of polite conversation. She was approached by Nicole Porter again, who beckoned her to follow. Together they walked through a side corridor, leading to a smaller, more intimate sitting room. The lights there were dimmed, the walls lined with antique books, and a piano stood in the corner. Gathered inside were Jacob Henderson, a striking brunette woman in a navy cocktail dress, and two other men in designer suits. One of them was Matthew Cooper, a name Vanessa vaguely recognized as a high-level investor. "This is Vanessa Thompson from the Riverside Grill," Nicole introduced. "She's the server for the evening's dessert." Jacob's gaze rested on Vanessa. His expression was polite, but unreadable. "Good evening," he said, simply, extending his hand. Vanessa shook it, doing her best to maintain composure. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Henderson." He offered a curt nod. The brunette woman, whose glittering diamond necklace caught Vanessa's eye, approached with a curious smile. "I'm Catherine Henderson," she said smoothly. Jacob's wife. If her tone was meant to be warm, it fell slightly short. It came across more as a statement of possession. "Is the cake ready?" "Ready and waiting in the kitchen," Vanessa confirmed. Trying her best to sound confident, Matthew Cooper cleared his throat and cast a sideways glance at Jacob. "I hear it's quite the showstopper." Jacob wanted nothing but the best. Something in the interplay of their gazes made Vanessa sense there was a story behind this party, a story she wasn't privy to. It felt like a celebration that for some reason was overshadowed by apprehension or unspoken tension. She wondered if it was a business-related event or maybe a personal milestone. Henderson reached for a crystal tumbler on a side table, taking a measured sip. "Thank you, Vanessa, for your time. Please make sure the cake is presented after dinner, precisely at 9. I'll announce the reason we're all here." Nicole checked her watch and gave a reassuring nod to Henderson. "We're on schedule, sir." With that, Vanessa was dismissed. She silently let herself out of the room, her mind abuzz with questions. She couldn't quite pinpoint why, but she felt as though she had walked into a theater where every character wore a carefully crafted mask, performing a script that had been rehearsed dozens of times. She also felt the unmistakable weight of being watched, although she couldn't pinpoint who among them was watching her. Back in the corridor, she inhaled deeply, trying to shake off the odd pressure that enveloped her. She reminded herself that her job was simple: unveil the cake and make sure guests enjoyed their dessert. Yet a sense of foreboding clung to her. as though the party's polished veneer concealed cracks that could crumble at any moment. The chatter from the dining room grew louder as guests found their seats for dinner. Vanessa had a few minutes to spare, so she slipped away to a back hallway, taking a moment to collect herself. Maybe she was just imagining the tension. After all, millionaires had complicated lives, high stakes, big deals, intense rivalries. Still, her gut told her something more personal was at stake tonight. She just couldn't guess what it might be. Soon enough, the time for the main course arrived, and Vanessa took her station in the kitchen. She plated salads, handed them to the servers, and then prepared to fetch soup bowls once the salad course ended. The entire time she thought about the man she'd just met, Jacob Henderson, the elusive millionaire, and she couldn't quite shake the strange sense of familiarity she felt upon looking into his eyes. As dinner progressed, Vanessa assisted in the kitchen, occasionally stepping into the dining hall to refill wine glasses or clear dishes. She tried to remain inconspicuous, but her curiosity about Henderson wouldn't relent. Something about him, the shape of his jaw, the slope of his nose, felt oddly resonant, like a half-forgotten tune that lingered in one's mind. Shortly before 9, she returned to the kitchen to finalize the cake's presentation. She arranged fresh raspberries around the base, smoothed out any imperfections in the frosting, and carefully set the sugar flowers in a cascading pattern down one side. Then she placed the cake onto a rolling cart, draping a white linen cloth over it to build suspense for the big reveal. Beautiful job, a soft voice complimented. From behind her, Vanessa turned to see one of the mansion's staff, a middle-aged woman named Harriet, who had been helping her throughout the evening. "Thank you," Vanessa replied, smiling. Harriet nodded approvingly. "They'll love it. You do look a bit tense, dear." "Are you all right?" Vanessa paused, her eyes darting to the polished silver handle of the cart. "I'm fine, just a bit nervous. This is one of the most high-profile events I've ever worked." Harriet gave a sympathetic grin. "Well, take a breath, it's nearly over." Indeed, the clock struck 9. Nicole Porter signaled Vanessa from the dining room doorway. It was time for the grand entrance. Vanessa straightened her posture, forced a practiced smile onto her face, and slowly pushed the cake cart through the wide doors into the dining room. Candlelight flickered, illuminating the table where Jacob Henderson now stood, tapping a spoon against his champagne glass to command attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady and authoritative. "Thank you for joining me tonight for this very special occasion. Before we conclude, I've prepared a little surprise, something sweet to mark the beginning of a new chapter." All eyes turned to Vanessa. She halted the cart at the head of the table, then lifted the linen cloth with practiced flair. Polite applause rippled through the guests. As they admired the 3-tier masterpiece, Vanessa stole a quick glance at Henderson, noticing the faintest trace of a smile. But there was a tension in his eyes, as though his mind was elsewhere. Nicole stepped forward to help, but Henderson waved her off. "Vanessa, is it? Why don't you do the honors of slicing the first piece?" Vanessa nodded. This wasn't unusual. Some hosts preferred to let the server handle the first cut, especially with elaborate cakes. Steadying her hands, Vanessa picked up a silver cake knife. She was about to make the first slice when suddenly a voice from across the table spoke up. "Jacob, old friend, might we talk a moment before dessert?" It was the older gentleman with sharp eyes. Mr. Jonathan Barnes, apparently. The question seemed laced with tension. "I have some news that can't wait." A flicker of annoyance passed over Henderson's face. He opened his mouth to respond, only to be cut short by Matthew Cooper, who interjected, "We agreed we wouldn't mix business with pleasure tonight, Barnes." The air bristled with conflicting energies. Hoping to diffuse the awkwardness, Vanessa made the first cut into the cake. A collective murmur rose as she lifted a slice, revealing the decadent chocolate and raspberry filling. But then something even more startling happened. Henderson, as if compelled by sudden distraction, stepped closer to Vanessa. His hand brushed the corner of the rolling cart, knocking his leather wallet to the floor. It fell with a heavy thud, and its contents spilled out. Vanessa froze. She expected to see credit cards, maybe a driver's license. Instead, her attention was inexplicably drawn to a small, well-worn photograph that fluttered across the floor. Even as Henderson hurried to gather his belongings, Vanessa's eyes locked onto the snapshot. Before she could stop herself, she stooped and picked it up. Her heart seemed to screech to a halt in her chest. It was a photo of a little girl, perhaps 6 years old, sitting on a swing wearing a pink jacket and a radiant smile. A woman stood behind her, caught mid-push, beaming with love. It was the exact same photo that used to sit on her mother's mantel, the one of her as a child, and her mother, Lisa. The realization hit her like a tidal wave, nearly causing her to drop the photograph. She felt as though the world around her had slowed to a crawl. Why did Jacob Henderson have a photo of her and her mother? Her heart hammered in her chest. Henderson's eyes widened in alarm. He snatched the wallet from her grasp. But it was too late. She had already seen what she wasn't supposed to see. For a moment, the entire room seemed suspended in silence. Vanessa felt her stomach lurch, her mind spinning with impossible questions. She stood there, slice of cake, still on the plate in her left hand, the photograph trembling in her right. Jacob Henderson's expression was no longer calm or reserved. It was panicked, as though he'd been caught in a damning lie. "Oh, why do you have this photo?" Vanessa managed to stammer, her voice sounding foreign to her own ears. All eyes fell on them. Catherine Henderson's face morphed in confusion. Matthew Cooper's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Jonathan Barnes narrowed his gaze, as though relishing the drama unfolding. Henderson cleared his throat, trying to regain composure. Vanessa, there must be some mistake. But the photograph didn't lie. Vanessa recognized the pink jacket she wore in it. She remembered that day at the playground, the smell of fresh-cut grass, and how her mother had promised to buy her ice cream afterward. There was no mistake. Trembling with shock, Vanessa set the plate down and met Henderson's gaze head-on. "Who are you?" she demanded, tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. "Why do you have a picture of me and my mother?" The tension in the room snapped like a taut wire. Guests began whispering in hushed tones, some craning their necks to see the photograph, others averting their eyes out of discomfort. Catherine Henderson stepped forward, her voice tight. "Jacob, what's going on? Why do you have a photo of this waitress as a child?" Nicole, clearly mortified by the turn of events, tried to usher the other guests away. "Ladies and gentlemen, perhaps we can move to the lounge for coffee while—" "No." The exclamation came from Vanessa. She couldn't hold back her anger and confusion any longer. Something told her to press for answers now in front of everyone when Henderson had no escape. "Tell me the truth." Henderson swallowed hard, his eyes darting between Vanessa and the stunned faces around the table. Finally, with a shaky breath, he nodded to Nicole. "Everyone please give us a moment." A reluctant shuffle ensued as the guests filed out into the foyer, some lingering near the door to eavesdrop. Catherine hesitated, but Henderson requested softly that she leave as well. She did so grudgingly, throwing a suspicious glance at Vanessa as she left. In the now sparsely populated dining room, only Henderson, Vanessa, Nicole, and the staff who remained in the corner stood silent. Henderson motioned for the staff to leave as well, but Vanessa insisted Harriet stay as a witness, The older woman stood quietly, her eyes full of empathy for Vanessa. Once they were alone, Henderson ran a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry," he began. "I never intended for you to find out like this." Find out what? Vanessa's voice trembled. "That you knew my mother. That you've been spying on me. Did you abandon us?" He looked pained. Guilt etched into the lines of his face. "I met your mother years ago," he said at last, his voice low. "We were both young. It was a whirlwind romance, and I made poor choices." Vanessa's breath caught. She felt a hollow pit forming in her chest as the enormity of what he was implying settled in. You're my father," she whispered. He closed his eyes and nodded. "Yes, I'm your father." A tremor jolted through Vanessa's body. She had lived her entire life not knowing the man who had helped bring her into the world, believing him to be some nameless, faceless stranger who had walked away without looking back. And now here he stood, a powerful, wealthy man who had apparently carried her childhood photo in his wallet. Rage, confusion, and a twisted sense of betrayal all warred within her. "Why did you leave us?" she demanded. "Why would you just disappear and never come back?" Henderson seemed to shrink, as though the burden of his guilt had grown too heavy. "It's complicated," he tried to explain. "I was still in college when your mother told me she was pregnant. I panicked. I was just a poor kid with no prospects. My father was strict, and he demanded I focus on my studies and then join the family business. We fought. I felt trapped. I ran away." Tears welled up in Vanessa's eyes. The father she had imagined for so long had never felt real. But hearing him speak, now confessing his regrets, made it heartbreakingly tangible. "My mother struggled," she said, her voice thick. "She worked 2 jobs trying to keep a roof over our heads. She never even told me your name. She said you weren't coming back." Henderson's shoulders sagged. "I looked for you both later on when I had more means. But your mother had moved, and the trail went cold. I had no idea where you were. I hired private investigators." But Vanessa shook her head in disbelief. "I lived in the same apartment complex my whole childhood," she exclaimed. "We never had enough money to move anywhere." "Your story doesn't add up." Guilt flashed across Henderson's features. I should have tried harder. But back then I was in a new relationship, building my company, and Catherine and I got married. My father was pushing me down a certain path. Before I knew it, decades had passed. A painful silence filled the room. Vanessa felt as though her entire life had been a lie. Or worse, she'd built her life around the absence of a man who had apparently carried her photo all these years. She finally mustered, "Why keep the photo if you didn't care enough to find me?" His eyes glistened with tears he refused to let fall. "I've carried it as a reminder of my greatest mistake." Vanessa's breath was ragged, her mind spinning. Part of her wanted to run out of the mansion and never look back. Another part demanded answers, restitution for the years she and her mother had suffered. "My mother died when I was 17, she said, her voice breaking. "She never got the chance to live comfortably. She died, and you thrived." Henderson looked stricken. Didn't know. The room felt stifling, as though the weight of all that had been left unsaid for decades finally filled the air. Vanessa stood there, tears streaming silently. No words could capture the tumult of emotions inside her: anger, loss, betrayal, an ache for the mother who had gone to her grave with secrets she never revealed. In that moment, it was clear the carefully curated facade of Jacob Henderson's life was about to crumble under the pressure of the truth he could no longer hide. Vanessa turned away from him, trying to collect herself. The staff who had lingered in the hallway had likely heard everything. Beyond the doors, she could hear the chatter of guests, obliviously enjoying their wine and hors d'oeuvres. How surreal it felt that her world was imploding while the party continued on without interruption. Catherine Henderson, having grown impatient, re-entered the room. Her eyes flicked over the scene. Vanessa in tears. Jacob visibly shaken. She closed the door behind her. "Jacob, the guests are talking," they heard shouting. "What is going on?" Henderson hesitated, casting a weary glance at Vanessa. Finally, he turned to his wife. "We need to talk later, Catherine." For now, please just keep everyone calm, but Catherine wouldn't be dismissed so easily. "Don't you dare shut me out," she said, voice raised. "What is this about a photo of this young woman in your wallet?" Vanessa straightened her shoulders. She was tired of the secrets. "He's my father," she said bluntly, the words burning her tongue. "He left my mother years ago. I never even knew his name, until tonight." Catherine's face went pale, and for a moment she looked almost physically ill. Her hand flew to her diamond necklace, clutching it as though it might ground her in reality. "Is this true?" Jacob Henderson exhaled a shaky breath. "Yes, it's true. But it was before we met. I had no idea she was working here tonight. How could you?" Catherine cried. "We've been married nearly 30 years, and you never told me you had a daughter out there." Vanessa felt a stab of sympathy for Catherine, but it was overshadowed by her own anger and pain. The sense of betrayal in the room was thick enough to taste. Harriet stood quietly by Vanessa's side, offering her a supportive hand on the arm, which Vanessa gratefully accepted. With a trembling voice, Catherine turned to Vanessa. "Listen, I'm sorry for what you've been through, but we have to handle this privately. If word gets out," Vanessa's eyes blazed. "Your concern is about the scandal, about your reputation. My mother died in poverty, while he built an empire." Anger flared in Catherine's eyes. "That's not what I meant. You think I can process this calmly, right here in front of everyone? God, my husband, kept this from me for 3 decades. You think that's easy for me to swallow? I need answers too." Henderson stepped between them, his expression desperate. "Let's not do this here. Vanessa, I'm truly sorry. I want to make amends. I know I can't bring back the years, but let me at least try to help you. Now." Vanessa laughed bitterly, tears stinging her eyes. "Help me by writing a check. You think you can fix this with money?" He shook his head. "I know it's not that simple, but if you'll let me, I want to be in your life. Whatever you need, support for school, a place to live, anything, I'll provide it. Just give me a chance." Catherine looked as though she might faint. "Jacob, you're talking about upending our entire life. We have business partners, shareholders. Stop, Vanessa," shouted the outburst, surprising even herself. "This isn't about business. This is about a life you left behind. It's about my mother who died alone, and me, the daughter you never knew." Her voice quivered. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you." Harriet, sensing the escalating tension, gently guided Vanessa a few steps back. "Let's get some air," she whispered. Vanessa hesitated, glaring at Henderson's tortured expression. Part of her wanted to keep screaming, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain she'd carried all her life. Another part wanted to flee, to return to her small, safe apartment and never look back. She nodded to Harriet, allowing herself to be led out of the dining room. As they passed through the hallway, Vanessa felt the curious stares of the party guests. Whispers followed her questions about who she was, what had happened, how the photo had revealed a scandal. She kept her head down, tears still brimming. Harriet took her outside through a side door, leading her into the cool night air. The chill of the evening hit Vanessa's flushed cheeks, calming her racing thoughts. She inhaled the scent of pine trees and freshly cut lawn. Far below, the lights of the city flickered like tiny beacons in the dark. It struck her that just hours ago, she was an ordinary waitress delivering a cake. Now her entire life had been turned on its head. She looked up at the stars, remembering how her mother used to say that each star represented a wish waiting to come true. But what wish could possibly mend the heartbreak of discovering her father had been alive and wealthy all along? While Vanessa stood outside, trying to gather the fragments of her composure, the mansion's interior buzzed with activity. Guests in the lounge cast furtive glances down the corridor, gossiping about the dramatic scene. Nicole Porter, the event planner, tried her best to manage the crisis, but it was clear that the evening's festivities were ruined. Jacob Henderson remained in the dining room, pacing back and forth, as Catherine glared at him from a distance. The tension was thick enough to suffocate Matthew Cooper, and Jonathan Barnes lingered awkwardly near the door, unsure whether to intervene or quietly vanish. Mr. Barnes, seizing the moment, cleared his throat. "Jacob, you've kept many secrets, it seems. There's also the matter we were supposed to discuss tonight." Henderson shot him a venomous look. Really, Barnes, now is not the time. But Barnes persisted, stepping forward with a triumphant glint in his eye. "On the contrary, it's the perfect time. The board has just unanimously decided to vote you out of your CEO position, effective immediately." The words struck Henderson like a punch to the gut. His jaw dropped slightly, and for a moment he looked too shocked to speak. Catherine gasped, covering her mouth with one trembling hand. "You can't do that." Henderson managed to sputter. "I built this company from the ground up. The board can't just vote me out." Barnes raised an eyebrow. "They can and they have. I've got the paperwork right here." He patted the inside pocket of his tailored suit. "Your public meltdown and the swirl of rumors about your personal life only hastened their decision. Investors have grown uneasy. They see your personal scandals as a liability, especially if word gets out that you've hidden a child all these years." Henderson's face went pale. The unstoppable force of corporate maneuvers bore down on him at the worst possible moment. Catherine reached for his arm, her eyes wide with alarm. "Jacob, is this true? Are they really forcing you out?" Barnes didn't wait for a reply. "Yes, it's true. Your husband's enemies have been circling for quite some time. Tonight's fiasco just sealed the deal, Karma. Some might say Henderson's hands shook. This is insane. I'll fight this. My lawyers." Barnes cut him off with a cold smile. "Oh, do try. But your contract has clauses that allow for the board to take control if they deem your leadership detrimental to the company's image. You signed it years ago, likely never imagining this scenario." A sudden heaviness filled the room. All the control power and composure that Jacob Henderson wielded seemed to collapse under the weight of his secrets and betrayals. Catherine let out a choked sob, realizing the gravity of what was happening. Henderson, his voice hollow, muttered, "You orchestrated this, didn't you? You took advantage of a personal crisis, turning the board against me." Barnes shrugged. "You gave them reason enough. Missed meetings, questionable expenditures, and now a scandal that could unravel your public persona. Let's not forget the whispers that you manipulated financial statements for your pet projects. The board decided it was too risky to keep you at the helm. Meanwhile, from the open doors leading to the corridor, several party guests watched with unabashed fascination. Matthew Cooper rubbed his temples in exasperation, perhaps regretting that he ever agreed to attend. Catherine Henderson glared at Barnes with fury. "You're a snake, all of you are. But mark my words, We'll make you pay for this." Barnes merely rolled his eyes. "Yes, yes, I'm sure you'll threaten lawsuits. Good luck. The board's decision stands. Jacob's out." At that moment, Harriet guided Vanessa back into the room, hearing raised voices. Vanessa paused, her eyes sweeping over the tense scene. Henderson looked up, his expression raw with despair. In the space of minutes, he had gone from commanding host to a man stripped of his corporate power and facing the harsh reality of losing everything. Barnes spotted Vanessa and smirked. "Oh, and look, the woman of the hour. It appears your uninvited revelation is the final nail in Jacob's coffin. Congratulations." Vanessa stared at him. Uncomprehending, "I didn't mean to." She looked at Henderson, who seemed suddenly smaller, like a child who had been caught stealing. A swirl of conflicting emotions tore at her. She wanted justice for her mother and herself, but not this avalanche of devastation. Not so swiftly. "You have no idea what you've done," Barnes said quietly. "But perhaps it's best you know the truth about your father, about the empire built on deception." Vanessa met Henderson's eyes, searching for some sign of regret or apology. Instead, she saw fear. Fear of losing everything he'd clung to for so many years. The unstoppable machine of karma had arrived, delivering swift blows without mercy. What had begun as a simple cake delivery had become a crucible of old sins and hidden truths, and the night was far from over. In the wake of the confrontation, the party guests quietly filtered out of the mansion. Some left murmuring words of sympathy for Catherine, others left in shock at Henderson's downfall, and still others, like Barnes, left with smug satisfaction. The carefully planned evening ended in a disaster that no one would soon forget. Vanessa found herself standing near the front door, her coat draped over one arm, Harriet by her side. The older woman had been a rock of support, offering tissues, water, and gentle reassurances. "Are you sure you're all right?" Harriet asked softly. Vanessa nodded, though her eyes were still red from crying. She felt raw, like an open wound. She managed to retrieve her tip envelope from Nicole, who handed it over with trembling hands and an apologetic look. Vanessa almost forgot the practicalities of her job. She had come here to serve cake, and she was leaving with a shattered sense of identity. Her father, Jacob Henderson, was somewhere inside, presumably dealing with the fallout of both personal and professional catastrophe. Vanessa wanted to leave to escape the suffocating atmosphere of wealth and betrayal. Yet a small voice inside urged her to face him one last time, to demand some clarity before she walked away. She turned to Harriet. "Would you wait for me by the van? I just need a moment." Harriet nodded in understanding, then patted Vanessa's shoulder gently. "Of course, dear. Take all the time you need." Vanessa set her coat aside and walked slowly back through the mansion's marble hallway. The lights were dimmer now, and most of the staff were cleaning up. She found Henderson alone in the sitting room with the antique piano. He stood by the window, staring out into the dark, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He turned at her approach, his face etched with weariness. "Vanessa," he said, voice barely above a whisper. She steeled herself. "I'm not here for a reunion. I just need to know, why now? Why did you carry my photo all these years but never find me?" He swallowed hard, setting the whiskey down on a side table. "I told you I tried to look, but after a while I just focused on my business. My new life, I never stopped thinking about you or your mother. But I told myself, you two were better off without me." He gave a bitter laugh. "You see how that turned out?" Tears welled up in Vanessa's eyes again. She wasn't better off. She died of an illness we couldn't afford to treat properly. She was alone, working herself to death while you were climbing the corporate ladder. If you'd come back, if you'd even bothered, I might have gone to college right after high school, not years later." He bowed his head, silent tears glistening in his eyes. "I'm so sorry I can never fix that. I know it. But please let me try to help you. Now, let me pay your tuition. Get you a better place to live. Help with anything you need." Vanessa's jaw tightened. A part of her wanted to scream at him, to fling every ounce of pain in his face. Another part wanted to let him help because the struggles of her life were still ongoing. But the memory of her mother's sacrifices fueled her resolve. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said quietly. "What's happened tonight? Losing your CEO position, your reputation, that might be karma catching up to you. But it doesn't erase what you did to us." She paused, taking a trembling breath. "Maybe one day I'll be ready to talk again, but right now, I need space." Henderson nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I understand," he whispered. "I'll be here whenever you're ready, Vanessa." Inhaled deeply, trying to steady her emotions. She felt an overwhelming ache, a sense of finality to the years of questions that had plagued her. In some way, the truth was freeing, even if it was cruel. She turned and walked out of the sitting room, leaving Henderson behind in his massive, empty estate. Stepping outside, she found Harriet waiting by the van. The night was dark now, the mansion's glowing windows reflecting in puddles on the driveway. Vanessa got into the driver's seat, her mind swirling with everything that had happened. She pulled away from the estate, heading back toward her humble apartment, unsure whether she had found closure or opened a wound that might never fully heal. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of emotion and consequence. Gossip about Jacob Henderson's downfall spread through the local business community like wildfire. The board's decision was made official, and a new CEO stepped in, publicly disassociating the company from Henderson's personal indiscretions. Catherine Henderson was spotted at various charity galas, without her husband, fueling rumors of a pending divorce. Meanwhile, Henderson himself largely vanished from the public eye. Vanessa tried to return to her normal routine at the Riverside Grill, but the bizarre twist of fate that had forced her to confront her father could not be so easily forgotten. Sleep evaded her at night, and she found herself waking up drenched in sweat, replaying that moment when she saw the photo in Henderson's wallet. Her emotions fluctuated between anger, sadness, and a perverse curiosity about what might happen next. One afternoon, she found a letter slipped under her apartment door. The envelope was of high-quality paper, embossed with Jacob Henderson's monogram. She hesitated before opening it, unsure if she even wanted to know what it contained. Inside was a simple note: "Vanessa, there are no words to express my regret. I've arranged a trust fund for you to be managed by a lawyer named Alan Price, whose card is enclosed. It's not enough to make up for the past, but it's something. I understand if you want no part of me or my life, but please let me do this one thing to help your future." Jacob, shaking Vanessa, flipped to the next page, a formal document outlining the terms of a trust with a substantial sum enough to cover her education and living expenses for several years. Her initial reaction was fury. Did Henderson think money would heal her pain? Yet a quieter voice inside reminded her of her mother's struggle. How Lisa Thompson had constantly worried about making rent. How she had insisted Vanessa's only way out was through education and independence. For days, Vanessa wrestled with her conscience. She pictured her mother's face, heard her gentle voice urging Vanessa to dream bigger, to study what she loved without fearing the cost. Maybe I can do something good with this, Vanessa. thought honor my mother by using the opportunities she never had. Ultimately, Vanessa decided to accept the trust not as a gift of reconciliation, but as a resource to build a life that both she and her mother could be proud of. She contacted the lawyer Alan Price, who arranged the paperwork. The money was set up in a way that wouldn't force Vanessa to interact with Henderson if she didn't want to. Over time, the press moved on to the next scandal, and the memory of Henderson's demise faded from public discourse. Vanessa, however, was left with the tangible weight of a new chance. She enrolled in community college classes, part-time focusing on hospitality management, a natural extension of her job. She hoped to one day open her own restaurant or bakery, her mother's dream for her. Meanwhile, Harriet and Clara Hamilton offered unwavering support, encouraging her to pursue her education, even giving her flexible work hours. The Riverside Grill became less a mere workplace and more a sanctuary of friends and mentors who believed in her months past. Vanessa still carried a swirl of unresolved emotions about Henderson. She occasionally caught herself glancing at the phone, wondering if he would call or if she should reach out. She wasn't ready yet. The wounds ran too deep. But for once, she had a sense that life might finally be within her control. One rainy evening after finishing a late shift, Vanessa walked home and paused at a local bakery's window. The smell of freshly baked bread wafted out, reminding her of simpler times when her mother would bring home day-old pastries, and they'd feast as though it were the finest cuisine. Vanessa closed her eyes and smiled. She wasn't the same naive girl she'd been just weeks ago. She was stronger now, armed with a truth she never thought she'd learn, and an unexpected push toward a better future. She whispered softly to the night air, "We did it, Mum. We're gonna be okay." The city lights glowed across the damp pavement, and in the distance, she could just make out a star peeking through the clouds. For the first time in her life, Vanessa felt the weight of her past lighten, replaced by cautious hope for what lay ahead. Thank you for joining me on this emotional roller coaster, where one fateful cake delivery unraveled decades of secrets, betrayals, and regrets. Vanessa's life took a dramatic turn when she discovered her own childhood photo in Jacob Henderson's wallet, forcing them both to confront a painful history of abandonment and shattered dreams. Though Henderson faced the swift hand of karma, losing his corporate throne and standing, Vanessa found the courage to carve out a future for herself, honoring her mother's sacrifices along the way. It's a reminder that truth can cut deep, but it also has the power to set us free. If you found this story compelling, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more real-life dramas and thought-provoking stories. Your support helps bring these powerful narratives to a wider audience. Until next time, thank you for watching and take care.